Welcome to Club E. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I am your architect of business growth and will work with you to unlock your potential and amplify the scale of your company. With today's session, we are starting the Director Series, Board Topics of Today. And part one is a Board of Directors primer. Our goal for the Director Series is to support emerging and middle market companies and those in the business ecosystem who assist with their success. Future topics that we expect to cover include how to get on a board of directors, due diligence as a board member, providing leadership oversight as a board member, and many other topics. So look forward to those in the future. I want to thank our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, and Voyager U, creating a path for you to have an independent work and business lifestyle. To participate in the comment section today, make sure that you're watching in YouTube. And while you are there, remember to subscribe and hopefully like the Club E channel. We need your help. It'll just take a moment. I'll wait for you. Go down there and hit the subscribe and like button. That will allow us to deliver better content to you, as well as let you know when we're going live. You can also now catch Club E on your favorite podcast platform. All right, with that, I'd like to introduce today's guest. Jim Zuehlke is founder and president of Cardinal Board Services. His contact info, jimz@cardinalboardservices.com. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. Love being here with you.
Yes, and for those of you who have followed Club E for a while, you know that Jim has been on a couple of events with me, so welcome back. We're glad to have you. Again, our intention today is to have this be an interactive conversation, so please go to the comment field of your YouTube platform and you can submit your questions, and again, Jim's contact info will be there as well. All right, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your firm, and the various things that you're up to.
Okay, well, thanks for having me first off, Rick. You know, we've known each other a long time and I always look forward to these discussions we have. And since you and I both have been on boards and work with boards, it should be a pretty good interactive. So I grew up in southern Minnesota, and you and I have talked about it. There's a connection, we think, between the two of us. And then came and moved here to the Twin Cities and have had, for the last 25 years, I've had my own company. And about 9 years ago, we started Cardinal Board Services because we are asked by many of our clients to be able to help me go find a board of directors person or help me figure out my board. And having served on a couple of boards as well and still do, I had that expertise, help recruitment as well. And we've been doing that, like I said, for 9 years, and it's been really, really fun, effective. We've seen great results for our clients because of that. And we see it continue to grow in our business now of, supporting our clients and not just doing recruitment. There's a lot of other things to be done about compensation, board structure, governance, all of the things that make up a board and have it be successful.
Question regarding the COVID time period that we find ourselves still in.
Yeah.
Has that increased the demand for your services?
No, I wouldn't say it's really increased the demand for the services. I would tell you what COVID has done is the boards I serve on, and I'm sure the same with you, is it's increased the need for the board members to really be involved with management because we're uncharted waters. Everyone's facing uncharted waters. Back in March and April, you spent a lot of time just checking with management almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And now it's settled in, but it's still, everyone's very, very close to watching it because we don't know how the economy is going to go in the next 12 months as well.
Okay. All right. So again, our intention today, a board primer, is to give people some background into boards, and then we'll go into more details in future sessions. This is an opportunity, though, for you to ask questions. We've already had some submitted. We will get to those. Go put those in the comments field, as well as hit the subscribe and like button. And then we do have some questions that Jim and I have formulated. We'll go through those. We'll try to weave in your questions and then also cover some of the future topics when we do sessions in this series going forward. All right, Jim, tell us a little bit about the board landscape. And there are really four different types of boards. Talk to those a little bit, and how do they differ from one another?
Okay, great question. So there's the volunteer board is the kind of the basic board. It's interesting because my son is now, I'm so excited because he's going to join a volunteer board. A volunteer board is around your passion. So you're given time to what your passion is. There's an organization that needs somebody on their board to help out. So that's the most basic one. And really what you're given is your time. The second one is really a nonprofit board, which you're giving both time and probably some money. So this is they're needing some expertise from you, plus that this is something you might be passionate about, but you also have a feeling it's going to be more than just, just a volunteer board. They're going to expect more out of you. And sometimes it's money or it's helping raise money as well for the cause. The next one is an advisory board. So an advisory board is where you're starting to actually get paid some. They want your time, but they also want your expertise. You're bringing something to that organization. It could be an industry knowledge that you have. It could be around a technology or around a business function like manufacturing or accounting or whatever it might be. But you're there to give advice. And so you're just and they're going to pay you for this, and you're going to meet on a regular basis. Then the last one is really a full fiduciary board. And that's where you're getting paid really well. And you're taking on really governance type of activity. Your oversight, and you're responsible to the stakeholders, that you're watching management and making sure they're acting in the stakeholders' best interest. So you might be hiring and firing the CEO. You may be approving strategy, approving dividends that are going to be provided to the shareholders. But it's much more serious and much more of a bigger time commitment. And that's as you go up the ranks, the more time it is that you have to spend as well.
Sure. Let's go back and just cover those a little bit more for everybody out there. The volunteer board you highlighted as something that you give time to. I was involved as the founder in building basically a volunteer board, a committee to launch a golf fundraiser for my high school. Did that nearly 25 years ago. Other than the COVID 2020, we've had an event every year and raised money. And you're right, there's a lot of time there. It usually revolves around some sort of passion or group that one has an affinity with. Any tidbits of advice for somebody thinking about joining a volunteer board or getting involved in some capacity?
Know the amount of time that's being requested, because that's going to be, do you have 5 hours a week, if that's what they say? Or maybe like your golf event, maybe it's 5 hours a month, except for the month when it happens, then it's a lot. So just know what the expectations are and the commitment is from a time standpoint, because that's really what you're giving is your time.
Okay. And then the second one you mentioned was the nonprofit, where not only are you giving some time, but you also might be asked to donate. And you might be asked to donate at certain levels, and those levels might end up being significant. Also, though, lots of times people get involved with nonprofits that they have some sort of affinity to. So similar to the volunteer board, the nonprofit board also follows usually people's passions. I know I was involved with the Minnesota Zoo Foundation board for 2 4-year terms. That was something I did for 8 years while my kids were younger, and we were using the board a lot. And so actually there's a piece of advice that I've kept with me all these years from that board that I get your opinion on. So Lee Emke, the director at the time, said he wanted 3 kinds of board members: doers, door openers, and donors. Any bits of advice for somebody thinking about going on a nonprofit board?
Rick, that is really excellent advice about the 3 Ds, because that's what it's going to be. And if you really want to say, I'm going to join this nonprofit to get good board experience, like for example, it could be something like the zoo. It might have 50 board members, which you say, well, you don't even have to show up to the board meeting, but because you did something, you got on the board. But in the end, there's always an executive committee or a finance committee where all the real decisions get made. So you may want to try to get on that over time. But yes, there's the expectation you're going to be giving something. and time plus those 3 Ds.
Yeah. So at that particular board, to be funny, I always said I wasn't telling folks what the animals were eating. I was definitely on the finance and fundraising side.
Yeah.
Um, say advisory boards, especially for companies that I get involved with at Brimacombe Capital. That's always a big component of pushing businesses forward and being a catalyst to change. I've done many of those recently. TimeSolve, TIMESOLV, took in some private equity money early in 2020. So that advisory board was a big success in pushing that business forward. Any advice, Jim, for folks thinking about joining an advisory board?
Well, I think what's important is know what you're bringing. It's called an advisory board for a reason, because it's not like the governance piece where you're trying to help management grow the business, but they're bringing you in because you have an expertise. Like it could be, that marketplace, or you have connections for them. I love what you told me the story about with one of your companies that you worked with. On Thursdays you brought donuts over and stuff, because your involvement, it's trying to help to grow the business, and it's not as defined. It's more of just reach out and try to help them. And so I think and you're going to get paid. Could be equity, could be cash, could be a combination, but it's worth your time, but you'll get a lot out of it too.
Yeah, and we might, if we have time, dive into the question around compensation. If we don't in this session, we'll get to future ones. Just at a high level, because we'll get into it more, but talk a little bit more about fiduciary boards. I know I've done a number of those, currently on 5. My involvement is more middle market, like with Highland Bank, a Club E sponsor, down to emerging companies. I know, Jim, you've worked with some of the largest companies in the world with board level activity for them. But maybe just talk a little bit about your involvement with the fiduciary board side of things.
So fiduciary really means that that you are making decisions for the company at a level. And like I said before, a lot of times it's hiring, firing a CEO, approving strategy, and other issues that might come up that more than the management needs to help make that decision. And one thing you find with fiduciary boards, they tend to have committees as well. So there's a comp committee, an audit committee, a governance committee, and technology committee often. So you're going to serve on the board, but you also serve on a committee that's going to really be key to the business as well. Now, fiduciary board time-wise, I mean, if you're a public company, you could be spending over 200 hours a year on this, and that's why you're getting paid pretty well. In a private company and an advisory board, it might be somewhere 60 to 80 hours a year. So the time commitment is bigger as well.
Okay. So speaking of board governance, maybe talk a little bit, kind of the definition, give a little bit more of an overview and what's expected.
So, I thought about this because we had talked a little bit beforehand. And so what's expected? Expected is that you're present. Sounds so simple, but a lot of people, a lot of board members, when it comes to this, are just not present. Either they didn't prep, or they're there, but they say, I got to leave early because I got this thing going on. It's like being a good board member, and especially in a fiduciary one, is you have to be present and prepared and understand the business. You can't use the line says, I don't really get your business. It's like, well, then why have you been on this board for 2 years? So that's, that's if nothing else, that's the one thing, is being present.
Okay. And then from a kind of a definitional standpoint, governance, meaning the action or manner to sway or control. You might get involved with the details of the operation. You mentioned a little bit, you might need to hire or fire the CEO. And so there are a number of different things there. Bottom line, what we're trying to do as board members is increase the chances of a business success. Anything else you want to throw into that list?
Yeah. So I think about was that, many of us out here are parents and have children. And so governance is like you're being an aunt or an uncle. So your aunt and uncle will give you advice, and support you, but they don't raise you. They don't, they're not in the day-to-day of your life. And you think about your favorite aunt or uncle. They were there to give you advice when you needed it because mom and dad you didn't want to go to, and they're always supportive of you. That is where governance really is very, very effective, and if they play in that role.
And asking questions and providing perspective, maybe more so than trying to tell somebody what to do.
Right. You're not here to judge. You're here to help.
All right. How about talk a little bit about diversity in the boardroom? Now more than ever, it's important, but diversity means a lot of things. There are, as we talked about before today's session, 4 pillars of board diversity. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, Jim?
Right. And so we've done diversity searches for a number of years, and we really backed into this concept. There's 4 pillars, and the pillars that I see are the common one people think about is race and sexual orientation. That's a hot topic right now. But really the other ones that are equally important is the person's geography. And I'll tell you some stories about geography, age, experience. And so if you have a board full of people that are the same age from the same location, and they used to like to talk about old white guys that all look the same, you're going to get the same answers all the time. Diversity is to help flush out ideas and to be able to pick the best one. And so that's really where it comes from. And it's around all of those. And every time you bring a board member on, you should look for some form of diversity. And it's not just one or the other, but take age, for example. Why, if you're a very established company, why don't you have a 35-year-old, the sharpest 35-year-old you could find on the board? Because that person's going to understand that generation and that part, how to do business, and give you a good perspective. Now, you don't just bring people on the board from a diversity standpoint just because they can check the box, because they won't be happy and you won't be happy, because they have to have all these other things and then have some diverse aspect. But I know that you also think about it in the different types of kind of people that would make diversity. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I wrote a blog a couple of months back talking about considering people's skills and not just their strengths and or their titles. So if you look at somebody as kind of a holistic person, they bring skills and strengths, not just a title. The blog was around actually using birds that I saw this summer up at the lake when I was escaping COVID, went up to the cabin, and these birds, what's interesting is there's a certain ecosystem going on, and it struck me that, yeah, you could have somebody with a certain title or somebody maybe of a certain age group that checked a box, but really you want additional skills. And so some of the ones I identified, tying it with the bird analogy, the hummingbird gathered and shared opportunities and knowledge. So thinking about somebody who's very active out in the business community could be somebody that you'd really want to have with your board. You certainly want to have somebody with outside the box thinking, which actually the owl is very unusual. It's nocturnal. It hunts by sound, not by sight. So like an owl, you want somebody with outside the box thinking. Turns out, I didn't know this till this summer, but the blue jay keeps all the birds kind of in their place and in their role. And so the word I took and attached to the blue jay was accountability. So somebody on your board probably needs to step forward and add a level of accountability to what's going on. Another one that I found interesting was the great blue heron, and they don't do all that much, and they're very stealth in their hunting, and they actually don't hunt a lot. However, they're very successful. So the word I attached to the great blue heron was efficient. So you might have somebody in the boardroom who doesn't share a lot of ideas or maybe doesn't talk a lot, but when they do talk, they are spot on. So you want somebody who is very efficient with their ideas, efficient with the talking and what they put forward to the board. And then last but not least, all boards need the equivalent of having an eagle, having that strategic vision, kind of bird's eye view. So again, putting people on the board, absolutely, you have these 4 pillars. You have the gender, orientation, and race. You also have geography and age and experience. And then beyond that, what are the skills that people bring to the table? And so that's just a different way to look at who you might want on your board. So Jim, talk a little bit about that diversity across skills, across titles, across all these other characteristics. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to get the best decisions made possible. So talk a little bit about that.
So, and your bird analogy is just spot on. I just love that because it truly is. If you sit around the boardroom and you have those diverse people that contribute in different ways, usually you get to those decisions much better and much quicker as well. So it becomes a lot more lively debate because people want to understand. The one thing is when we work with clients, if they have diversity as part of their focus on their board, that usually means they have excellent leadership. Because you've got to be, think about it, you have to be uncomfortable with bringing in people that are not like you. And so because if you're embracing that, that's like, I care more about the success of the business than just that I'm happy that everyone thinks like me. So, we have a client that we've worked with for a long time, and we've done the last 3 searches we've done from her have been diversity searches, diverse in those 4 pillars in one form or 2 forms or another. They've grown their business 5x in the last 8 years. I mean, that's 5x. So you think about it's not just because of the board, but the board sure helps that because otherwise it's too much groupthink. And as we've found out in 2008 and in 2020, white swan or black swan events do happen. And so you got to be able to respond to it. And the board is very key for that.
Absolutely. Also, it's not just, and 5X is a fabulous return. It's not just about return, but you're also trying to lower the risk profile.
Right. That's really key because it's the risk is what gets you thrown into the ditch.
Absolutely. So Jim, you talked a little bit about that one private company, 5X in 8 years. Maybe, obviously, you can't give names or whatever, but maybe just talk a little bit more about that example and fill our audience in.
Well, one of the things that's important is to look at, we call it a gap analysis, is to say, what are the, and we've done this in a number of our clients, what are the areas that are important to your business today and going forward for the next 5 years? And then we look at the board members that you have and you say, how many of those boxes can we check? And we never can check all the boxes, but we can see some glaring holes where we don't have stuff. And that's where the diversity part of it comes in. And really one of the things that we're seeing out in the marketplace is a changing of the kind of people that come in. We don't just need C-suite executives, CEOs or presidents. We want people with specific skills. Maybe it's a chief human resource officer because labor is a big issue nowadays with companies. Maybe it's a chief information officer. We've done a couple of those because guess what? Technology is so important in every company that's out there today. So lots of different things. And we look for somebody who's at the level and can fill in some of those gaps and so that we can fill that gap analysis and check more boxes so that we like you said, we've got risk covered and we can also help accelerate growth because by staying on the path that needs to be.
Okay, reminder to everybody, if you are out there, hit the subscribe and like button. If you're on the YouTube platform channel, you can submit a question there. We do have a couple of questions that came in ahead of time. Got some others coming in as we speak. A reminder that this is going to be a series. We're trying to do this as a primer today. I'm going to bring a couple up now. We'll try to bring a couple of questions up going forward, but we may have to dive into some of these questions a little deeper at some of our other sessions. So I have a question from Susan that also overlaps with a question from Gary L. Gary L. being a longtime participant in Club E. they were both talking about the level of liability at the board level and what they take on as fiduciaries. Susan's got more to her question. Gary's got more to his question. At a high level, for today, I'm going to leave it that we have insurance directors and officers insurance, and then there is coverage for the liability issue and description around that. In the bylaws, you'll also want to talk to an attorney and review the D&O insurance before you ever go on a board. But I just wanted to throw that out there that, again, folks can submit their questions. Susan, thank you for participating. Gary, thank you for participating. We'll dive into the indemnification question in a future event in more detail. Gary also had a question, and Jim, just talk a little bit about kind of typical board sizes, the number of seats, and maybe how independent board directors fit within that hierarchy. And then we'll maybe tie that into committees as well. But talk a little bit first about kind of board size.
Okay, so great question. I would say that the first thing to know is you should always have an odd number of people on your board. That way there's no tie votes. So that's just a kind of a basic 101 thing. I would say the average number of boards, the boards that I see and have participated, the average number of directors is 7, average. So, the bigger the company, if you got, if it's 3M in town, I bet you if you counted 3Ms, they probably have 13 or 15. They have lots of directors. Bigger organization need bigger, and you parcel off because of these, they spend times on committees as well. But generally around 7, and I would, and typically depending on what kind of company is it a privately held company? Is it a family-owned business? Is it an ESOP? Is it a PE-owned company? Is it a public company? That will change the number of independent directors you have. But you should have just a basic guideline would be equal number of independent directors as well as inside directors. So that would, if you have equal numbers or close to equal numbers, that's probably good. I've seen it go both ways, but you want the independent voice to be heard. And if there's not enough on there, you can be heard, but it's not acted upon.
Right, and I would touch on 2 of those that you mentioned, the family board, typical family business board, as well as one that has investment in it, whether it's through a venture firm or a private equity firm. On the family board, if you have a board of 7 and all 7 of them are family members, obviously you're not going to get a lot of diversity of thought there. So certainly at the family board level, you need some independent board members. On the investment side of things, that changes the dynamics a little bit. Typically, there's in essence, a kind of a pay-to-play component. The larger the investor, the more apt they're going to be shaping what the board looks like. With that said, to Jim's point of having some balance, you might have a balance between company insiders with independents with investors. Right. And so hate to give it to you, everybody out there, but it is a little bit, it depends on the situation. But Jim, I think you hit a good word, and that was balance. So thank you for those questions, Susan and Gary. Got a couple of others already, which I will get to. Reminder to hit the subscribe or like button, put it in the comments field, and we'll try to tackle some of those.
Rick, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
You've been on a lot of boards. Why don't you just, what do you think a good board looks like in your mind?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, the Minnesota Zoo Board, nonprofit, built the volunteer board through the golf thing. Miller Open, by the way, for any of you Washburn high school grads out there. And then on the advisory board and fiduciary board, I kind of across all of those, a couple of things that come to mind. And the focus really needs to be on the company. And I know it's kind of cliche, but it makes me think of it as there's no I in team. And so folks should be focused on the company. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And we'll talk a little bit in the subsequent question here about boards that aren't working, but want the focus to be on the company. Secondly, we want to have room for everybody to contribute. If you have one or two people that are dominating the conversation and they don't give space for folks that maybe are a little bit more introverted or a little quieter, you can have some one-sided conversation. And I always try to think of the amount of talking time as a pie, like 100% pie, and how is that split between everybody around the table, and does everybody get a reasonable share so that they can contribute? So second thing would be allowing everybody to participate. And then thirdly, and Jim, you touched on this earlier, you want to make sure that folks are engaged, and engaged not just in showing up, but engaged in that they're doing their homework, et cetera. They come prepared, their questions are good, they come on time, but you want to make sure that people are consistently engaged. And it's not always easy, because you mentioned it takes a lot of time, especially for the bigger companies, and it's easy to get sidetracked or distracted. So you want people who are consistently engaged. So those would be my three things around what an effective board looks like. Jim, how about you? What do you think an effective board looks like?
I couldn't agree more with all of that piece of it. It's like, it goes back to my think of yourself as an aunt or an uncle, because you know that you're not there all the time. You're there to support. And I think your points are excellent. The boards that I've been involved with, that's really important. And given not sometimes we often say, hey, you got to participate. Well, let's make sure we give them room to participate. That was a really excellent point. I couldn't agree more with that.
How about just either the preparedness or the willingness to dive in? Maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I struggle with when somebody comes to the board meeting and says, I don't understand the business, and that's not being prepared, or that they don't do anything. They don't call management, or they don't go take them out for lunch between board meetings. That's not being involved as well. And I've definitely seen that. And I've definitely seen where we've had clients come to us and said, we've had these board members here, and, I just don't feel like we're getting much out of them. The hardest thing to do is get rid of a board member who's been on the board for 5, 10, 15 or more years, because and that's where your bylaws have to come in. How can you exit somebody from the board? Because if they're not participating, that's a sign of another good sign of a board, is that, they're doing a 360 review. They're asking each other, are we participating? Are you participating? Am I participating? Are you bringing value? Could there be somebody else could bring more value? And so one of the common things I say is that when I'm working with a client, that, somebody, they have to, if somebody retires, they're good for the board for another 3 years. After that, they need to tender the resignation, because if they're retired and they're sitting in Florida, they're just not connected to the business then.
Very good points. What about having a broad stakeholder perspective? That must fit into the definition of what an effective board does.
So yeah, I mean, you think about who are our stakeholders. And we all just talk about shareholders. That's pretty obvious. But stakeholders are employees. There's suppliers. There's customers. There's our community. And so around the board table, we should, they're talking about doing a layoff, or especially on PPP around the pandemic, and then before PPP came out and things like that. They're talking about the layoff, and then they're going to get the money, and they go, wait a second, we can't cut their salary and then give them this PPP money. That's not fair to the employees. The people around the board table have to look out for those others as well, such as the employees. That makes a really good board member. And it keeps, because managers in there just trying to, especially in a crisis like we've had, they're just trying to run the business and hopefully not take it down. But you need to bring other perspectives into play, and that's part of the diversity part.
How about an ineffective board? You've obviously had to replace ineffective board members, given the work that you do, and sitting on boards. You've seen, unfortunately, some dysfunction and ineffective boards. But how would you spot an ineffective board, or what are you looking for?
Well, how would you spot an ineffective board? first thing is if they're all the same, if that's one thing. So if everybody, is the same age, the same vintage of same background, you're not going to get much once you go back to that diversity. That becomes an ineffective board. I think the other piece that's an ineffective board is one where you might have independent directors, but there's really only one person making the decision. That's the CEO. And that could even happen in a public company. And that those are really, talked to somebody this week who had got on one of those in a public company, and they realized they just wanted a rubber stamp board. That's all this. And so they recruited people that would agree with the CEO's perspective. They'll stall out. That company will stall out because they won't be able, it'll be just one person's vision, which could be good some days, but you're not perfect every day. I see that as part of ineffective boards. I also see I also look at how prepared is the company to work with the board. Like, do you get your, usually there's a board packet prior to every board meeting, and it should come ideally 3 to 5 days before the board meeting, whether it's electronically delivered, whether it's, I get these things at my household, I get a book at my household and stuff. And in 3 to 5 days gives me enough time to read it multiple times, ask, make notes, maybe send the CEO some questions prior to the meeting and stuff like that. Getting it the night before, you just won't be as up to date on it as possible. So if somebody's not proactive about sharing information and also not and getting it to you on time, that's the sign of an ineffective board as well.
And you mentioned earlier in our talk here about connecting in between meetings.
Yes.
So presumably for a board that's not doing much interacting in between, that would be ineffective. And then the other thing that when you and I have talked about this in the past, when there's in essence negativity between board members and it's almost confrontational.
Yes. Now it's good to challenge management, but if you're the grouch in the room for every single meeting, people get tired of that. If you find exception to everything, because if a good board will help the CEO grow, and I've had it with the board that I serve on, I feel like we've helped the CEO grow because number one, we may not agree with him, but we stand by him and we keep nudging him towards getting better. And that's really important. And it's okay to disagree. It's okay to be very specific about what you disagree about. But for example, there was a budget that was just approved last month, and I didn't agree with the budget, but it was everybody else did. So I have to go along now. I have to figure out how I can support the budget that was approved, and that's part of being a good board member.
So a couple things kind of to add to your list there, which is a great list, by the way. Ineffective boards, ineffective board members. Every once in a while, fortunately, it's not all the time, but there are folks out there who like to, I would say, showboat or grandstand or are trying to prove that they're the smartest person in the room. Do you ever see that?
We see that. And that's the problem. That will get old as much as the grouch. That will get old as much as possible, as very quickly, because everybody goes, they just start rolling their eyes because the person's going to try to make it. I'll make another point. One of the things I tell first-time board members, don't go to your board meeting and say, well, this is how we do it. This is how I did it in my last company. You can use that idea and say, this is my experience, and you might go, but you should form it in a question. Don't be telling them what to do based upon what you did and was successful. You're in a different business. You're in a different time. Just because it's successful for you then doesn't mean it will be then. But think more. Don't be showboating and telling them what to do. And don't be just using only your past experience. Use your brain and think about how to translate it to them being successful.
And then I'm going to go back to something I mentioned earlier. Just want to make sure that everybody's heard, their comments and ideas are valued. The analogy, which I think is a good one with the great blue heron, not everybody's extroverted and not everybody's going to talk loud or often or forceful. And so you need to give people who might be a little quieter space to contribute. I'm sure you've seen that happen.
Yeah, exactly. That's why that's a great analogy. You really love the board member that They don't say much, but when they do, everybody listens because they know it's right on.
Right. And then we've covered, won't dive into it anymore, but folks that are interested, engaged, prepared. Sometimes people get involved just because they want the title of board member on their resume or their LinkedIn profile. And that's more of interest to them than the actual role. I'm assuming you see that too, unfortunately.
I get contacted on a weekly basis about people that want to get on boards. And the classic one is, hey, I just retired last month and now I'm ready to serve on boards. Like, they're a little bit late and they're retired. So they're looking for the board to fill their cup. And really, if you haven't been a mentor in your life, if you haven't been out mentoring younger people or colleagues at work, you're probably not going to be a good board member. So you already have done it. It's just not an activity when you want it to be your activity. You want to get paid for dosing out all this wisdom that you have. That's not what a board member is about. It's about being a mentor and caring about it. And hopefully that you'll get more out of it than you give, and give a lot, but you'll still get more out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a couple of other questions. Scott W., who's been a longtime friend and participant with Club E. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining us today. He had a question about small private boards. I'll just throw a couple things out there and then you can chime in, Jim, or throw in your own thoughts. First thing he wanted to know was how to find them. So I would say reach out to you, Jim, and Jim can help with that, doing that board search, or it's really a network kind of word of mouth activity. So part of his question was how to find board members. Another one was how big for a small company. And I think, Jim, you hit it on the head, which is the average is 7, but keep it odd. Sometimes it might be 5, maybe it's even 3, but certainly 5 or 7 for smaller companies would be a good size. Scott asked about the family participants. We covered that we'd want to cover both inside and outside. He did ask a question about compensation. And again, we'll get into details in future events, but at a high level, first thing I would ask would be, is there equity involved in that compensation or not? And that drives then what's the cash component. Maybe Jim, talk a little bit about the cash component, or in particular, given you're in the search business, the very first part of his question was, how do you find board members?
So you find board members, there's, you can find just through a network. The best board members are people you don't already know. Now, if I was building a board and I say, I really like Rick, why don't you come on board? I already have a relationship with you, so you're already biased to like me and I like you. So you're maybe not going to get that independent thought. So the first thing is, how can I find people board members that, that are that independent that I don't know? So you use your network to, it's 3 degrees of separation from you would help. You might use LinkedIn. LinkedIn, if you know how to use LinkedIn, you can find people on LinkedIn. And now, do you know how to recruit them and things like that? That may or may not be. Obviously, we know how to do that. And then there's other things. There's organizations. So lots of different organizations out there have people that want to serve on boards. NACD does. Private Directors Association does. And Women on Boards does. So lots of other places that you can go. But it's like everything in life. It's not easy. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, okay, you could probably figure it out on your own. Otherwise, you want to dig a little bit more, but make sure it's outside of your circle of influence is what I would first say.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep.
And then Jim, you and I spent some time together before today. Question is, what makes for a good board member? I came up with kind of putting my stuff together with your thoughts and combining it here. I'm going to read or go through kind of 7 of the ones that we came up with, and then maybe you can either add to that or talk about it a little bit more.
Yep.
So the first thing was contacts in that particular market or geography. Contacts meaning they're going to help with recruiting, they're going to help with sales, they're going to help opening doors, like a comment I made earlier. So again, contacts in that applicable market or geography. Talked a little bit about the eagle analogy. You want somebody who's a big picture visionary thinker. You want somebody who's respected in the community. So there's a little bit of cachet or strong feeling about that company because of the board member that you added. Fourth one that we came up with was available and have the capacity to do the work. Again, are they going to be there just in title only, or are they going to actually do the work? We want somebody who can follow through, paired with that strategic mind. So folks that are going to follow through. Another one, and very important, is somebody who's in alignment with the mission and vision of the company, and hopefully, and maybe even have passion for what that business is about. And then last but not least, which covers a lot of things, is just being a strong communicator. So those were 7 items that we came up with, kind of sketching out what we thought a good board member would have, or at least have some number of those. Any comments to the list we put together?
So it is complete. I like all of them. And when you were reading them again back to me, I thought, okay, which one's the most important? I can't say one's more important than the other. You could say some are stronger, but if it's that commitment is really important, but expertise is really important, as well. I think all of them, if you find somebody who has all of them, you're going to have an excellent board member if it hits the buckets that you want.
Okay. Talk a little bit, we touched on it earlier about COVID. Talk a little bit about how COVID has affected boards.
As we mentioned earlier, once everybody's affected, we didn't know how we're going to be affected. A simple thing is, okay, if we're going to have our offices open, how are we going to have people come to the office? Because we got to have social distancing, we got to wear a mask. I mean, what do we tell our employees? And it changed quite a bit. So that all of those discussions, which are pretty operational, but still, because it's brand new to everybody, the board actually weighed in quite a bit on that. Also, financially, is our business going to be down, and why is it going to be down? Or it could be up because maybe we make PPE, or whatever it might be, or we're a grocery store that's doing really well. So it changed, and so there was just more involvement by the board. I saw it spike in April and May, and then work its way down. Now it's starting to kick up again. I'd say more activity with the board, because 2021, and we all want to believe it's going to be over soon. We talked to somebody earlier that said it's probably more like October before we're really kind of out of the woods on this and things. So it's going to be, now we're saying, okay, 2021, what are we going to do differently? How are we going to move forward? We may not get any more money from the government like we did last year. So those are all the new discussions. I see that it's actually spiked and fell off, and now I'm going to see it start to rise again, not spike. And often in some of the boards I've worked with, they actually change board compensation. If the employees had to take a cut, they asked the board members to take a cut or take no money at all. And that has happened as well, I've seen.
Oh, good points. So I had a question from Garrick V. Garrick also, like Gary and Scott, active with Clubby over a number of years. So Garrick, thanks for joining us today. He asked a question about demand for technical capabilities at the board level, which I think asks or paves the way for a bigger question, which if you were to describe your all-star board, what would it look like?
Well, I think the all-star board you want to have, I look at board members, they need to have some multiple boxes checked in that gap, and then they need to have a X factor, something else that we get that isn't part of this normally. And so all of those things we've been talking about all the whole hour is somebody who's committed, who's prepared, all of those pieces. But I want to have my business functions checked off. The one that you just mentioned about technology is an interesting one. The last 2 board searches we've done, it was dead on about we need somebody from a technology basis. And technology is just not the ERP system. Technology is also technology maybe in our products, technology in, our marketing efforts, because look at how we go to market now into the use of technology in that. So you need to find somebody, that's a good example of finding that unique board person that can handle multiple technology questions as well. Plus be a good board member, because technology we discussed at every single board meeting going forward. I mean, look at these hacks that happened in the fourth quarter from SolarWinds software getting hacked into, and now all these companies have been at risk. And I've known people that have had to pay ransomware. Some board searches I've done, I've talked to people and they say it is not fun. And so having somebody on your board that understands that, because everybody is exposed to it.
Talk a little bit more. I know you and I talked about before today's session, kind of doing a gap analysis, and you touched on that a little bit earlier. Maybe talk about the importance of that, and then also a little bit about the importance of having either some P&L actual experience, or at least knows how to read financials and understand the implication on the financials of whatever strategies the board is talking about.
Right. And the reason why most boards used to be made up of CEOs, was because they knew exactly what that CEO was going through. They knew the P&L, they knew, all the different financial instruments that are out there, and they knew about operational things. But now an effective board, it's structured more with some functional experience. And so not everybody has a P&L experience. If you're the CIO of a company, you don't have a P&L. You have a budget, but you don't have a P&L. But if you're at the CIO level, you should be intelligent enough to be able to read a P&L and a balance sheet and understand what it is. Maybe it's part of your board education if you're not up to speed on it. But I can tell you, every single board meeting I go to, no matter if it's a volunteer board, a nonprofit board, advisory board, or a governance board, we talk about P&Ls. We talk about the business, or what the operation and how we fund it. Because if you don't have the money, you can't do the business. So even if you don't have it, you need to get smarter on it, and because you'll be lost for at least a third of the board meeting on what they're talking about and what that means.
Yep. And I think as I thought about this when you and I touched on the All-Star Board, what it looks like, I guess I'd take 3 buckets. Say the first bucket would be the executive suite, all the C-suite positions. You also might throw SVP, senior vice presidents of, say, sales and marketing into that one. And you prefer people who are in the domain, industry background, things that can add value to the business. So the first bucket for me was the executive suite. The second bucket is the expert. Kind of view those people as industry gurus or domain experts. They might have sales, marketing, advertising backgrounds. They might be from the capital markets, or nowadays supply chain. So the expert would be kind of the second bucket I would look in. And then to Garrick's point, and you touched on a little bit, Jim, was technology. Nowadays, almost all companies have a technology component. And if they're not a technology company, they certainly are leveraging technology. So again, domain experts, things like e-commerce, digital marketing, omni-channel, customer experience, operations, all those things are technology buckets that are important to businesses. So those would be kind of the 3 areas I would look in for an all-star board. But then again, it's not just about the titles, it's about the skills they bring. I'd send everybody back to think about that bird analogy. But people, yes, have a title. That entitle's important, but they have additional skills beyond their title. A couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up for today. Maybe at a high level, and we can get into more detail later. But just talk about a typical board meeting. How long does it go? What it looks like, et cetera.
So a typical board meeting, first off, starts 3 to 5 days ahead of time when you get your board book, and its typical board meeting is the preparation for it. Usually, the boards that I get involved with are usually half to 3/4 of a day. And the larger the company, you also have some committee meetings that can happen. Oftentimes you come in the night before, you have a dinner where everybody We're not talking about business. We're just talking about it. We're building camaraderie between all the board members. Fun thing to do. And then you go into the board meeting the next day, possibly. And if it's not as big of a company, you might it's just a one day thing, half a day you'll spend on it. You try to break it up as well. And then there might be some committee meetings, which are either that day, or you might do them telephonically or through a Zoom meeting like this as well. The other piece that's important to know about what you expect in a board, because I think we talked about this, Rick, is how much time do you spend? Who does the talking in the board meeting? Does management talk, or do the board members talk? And I'm of the firm belief that there's got to be about a 50-50 mix where management has to present, but board members need to respond to that presentation and also have an open discussion between management and between the board members.
Yeah, and then want to make sure that you're looking forward out the windshield and not just all your time looking backward out the rearview mirror. Totally agree with you about having balance of kind of the talk ratio between management and the board. I think you're spot on there. I also think you hit on a nice thing, which is kind of the sharing of a meal or some interaction that's not all business. Bigger companies might do that the day before, but maybe just touch on kind of the team building access of creating an effective board.
It's really important. And this, the last 4 board meetings I've gone to have all been Zoom meetings, and that's harder to do. It's harder to keep everyone's attention, and it's harder to do. And, because you want to talk about, where'd you go on vacation? What are you doing this summer? Whatever it might be. So that's very important, because if we've got a diverse board, we got to find some commonality, and that versus just coming in with your own perspective. So that's important. The other thing I didn't mention, Rick, that I think is important for you to think about as well is rhythm. There should be a rhythm to your board meetings, because one of the board meetings should be talking about succession planning. One of the board meetings should talk about budget. One of the board meetings should talk about strategy. One of the board meetings should talk about other big open issues, like if it's a family board, there should be some family discussions, or if it's a private equity board, what's the future of us selling the business? So the budget one's probably the fall meeting. The succession plan is probably the first of the year meeting. But if there's a central topic in each one of those, and then people can prepare for discussions around that. That's an important part of every board too.
And a reminder to everybody, we are going to do some other board series. Jim and I will collaborate on pulling these together. We'll have some other speakers. So we will be doing more of those in the future. Keep an eye out for that. Hey, Jim, it's been great today. If you look back on our conversation, if there was kind of one key takeaway you'd like to leave with our audience today, what would that be?
So just key takeaway in general is, if you get the chance to serve on a board, do it. And the reason I say do it is you will get more out of it than you put in. I mentioned that once earlier, but every person I've ever been involved with boards just loves the experience, even when times are tough, because it really sharpens their saw on things. I've got one example was we recruited an executive out of Cargill to go to a smaller company board. He was running a third of the revenue, like $35 billion of revenue for Cargill. And he went to this $200 million company board. And he told me, a year later, he said, I get more out of that board meeting and spending with that company. I know how to run my $35 billion business even better. He said, I get so much value out of this compared to what I thought I would do or what I get paid as well. So whether that be being on the zoo board or the Miller Golf, you're going to get more out of it than you put in. So be open to put something in, because you'll always appreciate it.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna go back to Scott W.'s question about small private companies. For businesses that aren't that big and don't have a substantial budget, an advisory board is a way to tap into a great network of people in a manner that's cost effective, and maybe not something that could make the budget bringing those people in full time. So given that I work with emerging companies and have seen the value, I mentioned at TimeSolve how important that advisory board was to helping that company grow. I would encourage all of you folks out there, with kind of lower middle market companies or emerging companies to consider doing an advisory board if you don't already have one, and that this can add a lot of value and be impactful. So if you don't have a board, go get one. And if you have a fiduciary board, you might consider doing an advisory board to even tap into other skill sets. So that's what I have for us. Jim, thank you very much for joining today. Everybody out there, keep an eye out for future events here in our board series. Again, Jim, thank you very much, and look forward to doing these in the future.
Great. Always a fun time with you, Rick. So look forward to it as well. Maybe we'll do it from the cabin next time.
I hope so. See ya.
Okay. Take care.